Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. Hope you're well, and I hope you are enjoying this year's 50 Most Relevant. I don't know if you can believe it. Number 32 is where we're at. We are well and truly into the early 30s and almost halfway through this countdown. We're talking who I believe are the most relevant players in your fantasy footy seasons for SuperCoach DreamTeam and AFL Fantasy. It's been about a week since we've had him on, so we had to get him back. Kane is on talking about Zach Merrett. Hello, mate. How are you?
Very well, mate. Very, very well. You're flying, for starters.
Thank
You're doing
you.
a good job. You're churning through. I think this is a guy that he's hard to place for mine. And I think that's probably why he lands at 32. Because part of you goes, look at the numbers, look at how many years he's produced those elite numbers. Like, this is a guy that should be top 20.
Yeah.
And then the hard thing is, because he's so consistent with his numbers, he doesn't give you that baked in value often that some of these other guys in the 50 Most Relevant give you. And, you know, when we're talking about going into the 2023 season, we know in these formats you're talking about in AF, DT and SuperCoach, discounts and, underperformances from previous years or battling injury in the previous years. That's really important in giving us great value. And
it is.
And I'm sure as we'll get into, Zach is just so reliable. While albeit such a high scorer, it's probably why you have to have him in this 30 range, because how do you place him much higher or much lower?
Yeah, and that's exactly the dilemma that I've had. And like you said, some will think, MJ, you're a dozen to 2 dozen spots off. Others go, yeah, he's always great, but never quite enough of a reason to make me have to select him. Let's talk about this 27-year-old midfield eligible Essendon bomber. Some top scores last year. In fact, his career high AFL Fantasy and Dream Team score came last year against North Melbourne. It was a 172, while his 150 against the Tigers in SuperCoach, while very, very good, still a couple of dozen points shy of what he's done as his career best score. It was in 2021. It was a 168 against the Sydney Swans. He's priced at a 107.24 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, which means he's just shy of the 950K marker in AFL Fantasy and just a touch over 972,000 in Dream Team. For SuperCoach, another 110 plus season, 112.2 means he's priced at a 617,000. And really, Kane, we talk about him as a premium, reliable, durable, consistent, scores in every column. Well, there are some limitations to his game. He just is there every single year.
Yeah, he is. And that's the thing, MJ, that I think is the reason he's not higher, is that it really hasn't been since 2016 and 17 in DT, where he was that real top liner.
Yes.
He's always just around the mark, in that 6 to 12 type of range. And that's probably something that does make him a bit tricky, is you go through a season and not a lot of people have him. You're sort of thinking, do I go for him? Do I go for someone else? He's not one of those guys, you think about the seasons McRae's had in the past.
Yeah.
Or a Lockie Neal, or a Tom Mitchell, or even a Laird last year, where you're like, this guy is clear and away the best player. They're on fire this season. They're killing me each week. There's a portion of the competition that have him. Merrett often seems to just slide under the radar a bit. And I think the funny thing is, the season that a lot of people were really on board was that 2018 season.
Yeah,
where round one,
he
he was concussed in the opening quarter. And I think that sticks with a lot of coaches, is going, I finally started this guy. I paid that big price packet because he was coming off back-to-back 117 plus seasons, which was remarkable. But ever since then, it's been really, really good.
Very good.
108 in 2019, an adjusted 115 in 2020. 2021 was a 110, and last year was a 107. Like, those are amazing numbers. But outside of maybe that 2020 season, which we know things were a little bit different with the shortened games, it was hard to get a read on him. And I think the thing that jumps out to me as well is you're always building that tag narrative. He always seems to be the guy that gets the attention.
Yes.
And he's so versatile that you do worry at times, Could he be moved to the wing? Could he play half forward? Could he play half back? He's such a good kick. We know we always want our guys, for the most part, as inside midfielders, and Zach has played that role too. So I think the tag and the role changes, especially with some of the recruits that we've seen Essendon bring in over recent years.
For sure.
We've had the draft pick of Darcy Parish and then development in the last 2 years as being, a key centre bounce guy. Big money signings of Shield and Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at even recent times, Sardis, Hobbs. Like there's some guys that you can start telling yourself, oh, where does he play? McGrath's rolled through there too. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty. But every year we end up at this point where he's in the mix again.
And he's yet again in and around the mark of a top 10 midfielder. Statistically last year, one of his better years in AFL standing, second in the league by average per game for uncontested possessions, sixth for disposals, eighth for inside 50s, 10th for score involvements. From a fantasy perspective, pumps out a 107.1, so seventh for midfielders last year, top 10 across the competition. So while we talk about these, unknown, maybe, yes, no, he's still amongst the 10 best scorers by average in that format of fantasy and dream team. 12 times 100 or more last year, 10 of them 110 plus, 6 over 120, and a career high 172 in AFL fantasy and dream team. And he really only had 2 stinkers, those 2 tagged games where his only scores under 80 all year. In SuperCoach, for a third consecutive season, pops a 110 average, goes at 112. Average, the 11th highest average in the formats, and 9th for overall midfielders. Scores 13 tons, 11 of them 110 plus, 8 of them 120 plus, 7 of them 130 plus, and 4 monsters 140 or higher. And he just drops the scoring under 90 in 3 separate matches. Here's the piece that really has coaches excited by him, because there was a 6-game patch last year that you were having one of 2 experiences around Zach Merrett. You loved everything he was about, or you were cursing his name weekly, because from rounds 15 to 20, he delivered a 6-round average in SuperCoach of 134.5 with a top score of 147 and just the 1 score under 130. It's an incredible hot streak. While in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, that same stretch of games, he goes on an average of 132, a high of 172 and a low of 118. And what's crazy to think about all these things is, as great as those moments were, last year was his lowest scoring and statistical in some other columns year for the previous 2 seasons before it. So as much as we look at this amazing stretch, there are still pockets where coaches go, he was so damaging. You could have got him at the perfect time last year after that ankle injury and bye pop. Maybe this is the narrative we see since 2016. He's barely missed a game. I think it's 5 games since 2016. 3 of them were this last year, where he miraculously recovered from a syndesmosis surgery. Only missed 5 games in 7 years. Hasn't dropped his average under 100. With so much unknown in the game, there is a narrative and story you tell yourself with Merrett and go, I know what I know, and I am taking risk out of the game, and I'll start with Zach Merrett.
Yeah, I think that's 100% the narrative, MJ. If you are going to starting, you have to tell yourself is that he'll get there. And looking at the previous seasons, well, I don't think there's that 117 upside.
Sure.
There is some upside in terms of, I think he could get to a 110 at the best case in DT, could get to a 115 in SuperCoach, which has him as a guy that you're happy to start for the year.
Yeah.
Again, you've mentioned the durability stuff, which is really, really strong. I think it is the upside, though, that does concern people splashing that type of cash.
Yes.
You guys, I've listened to the last few podcasts in particular, you focused on those guys coming from that 80s to 90 range and making the jump.
Yeah.
Tom Green, Caleb Sarong, earlier we did Chad Warner, Davies Uniacke. These are guys that will make the jump in my mind eventually. Now, is this the year? Who knows? We have to work that out. But if they do make that jump, that is a substantial amount of cash you are saving in your starting squad that can be reallocated.
Massively.
Especially, again, I'm more of the belief, again, new coach. I don't know how Zach can have a more plum role. I think the versatility, they've got to work out a few things with their team. As I said, they've got a mix of guys, Sheil and Heppel are 30 plus now. Merrett's right in that sort of sweet spot where he's been in the league, near on 10 seasons now. Parrish is in that age where he can step in and dominate games.
Caldwell,
but there's obviously
also
Caldwell as well, another guy they traded for. But then there's also those young, high-quality draft picks. Like, how do you mix that in? We haven't even got to an Archie Perkins. Like, how do you blend all these guys in?
That's it.
What's the plan? Is it something that you look at? We're going to go best team for the first few weeks, see how we go. If we don't get the results we want, do we start, looking more to the youth? Those are all things that, for mine, are unknown with Zach. So I personally got him regressing slightly. So clearly for me, he wouldn't be a start. The other reason I think he's more of an upgrade target is it seems like MJ, there's always 2 games a year where he goes sub 60. And in particular in a DT and a SuperCoach, with the way the pricing moves based on a 3-round rolling, always gives you a look to get him at a good price.
Yes.
Because he's not a massive ceiling guy. I know he had the huge game last year where he went absolutely berserk with a 172 in DT. But again, that conversely was a 140 in SuperCoach. So
yes,
unless that monster ceiling, comes after, the really quiet game, it's pretty likely that when he drops this, last year it was a 51 and a 55. Now, one of them came in round 9, one of them came in round 21. Clearly, if it comes in round 21, you either don't have him or you're stuck with him. It's not one of those ones where you're sort of monitoring for an upgrade at that point. But they always do seem to come. That's the issue. The previous year it wasn't as bad. It was a 67 and a 64 in DT. But we know in a 3-round price movement, that's enough to generate a 30, 40, 50K drop, depending on what you've done either side. So for me, when I think he's going to get to that stage where he's, if he's 105 in DT, maybe, a 110 in SuperCoach, he's hovering. But again, what we saw last year that was so beneficial for coaches is he was 99 pre-buy in DT. Came home post-buy with a 113. Now that is top 8 midfielder numbers. SuperCoach, first 11, 106, post-buy 117. Again, those are top 8 numbers. And that's where, for me, he's not a starting squad guy, but he's an upgrade guy you always have to watch because he's already on that borderline. But in stretches, he can match it, especially if he can cash in with the upgrade at a good price. Because
which is what happened last year.
Give you a look.
He gave you that
which is what happened most years. It's happened most years, MJ. That's the thing. And weirdly enough, it was round 9 last year. It was round 9 in round 2020.
All right, well, we're talking about a post-buy upgrade is really where the statistics are lending itself.
Yeah, and that's so important for someone that's at that top echelon of capability. I think if you're starting him, you believe he's got 5 points upside. He's a captain option each week.
That's it.
And that's the hard thing as well as we start a new season. We've got some history on guys that do tag. We've also got a lot of new coaches. So how do they manage their list? Do they employ anyone to do those roles? And for mine, Zach is still that target that has shown that when he does get attention, he can be heavily impacted. And that's part of the issue.
Yeah, and he is while there is still another buy round that comes after him, he does have round 14 buy round. So when you have a guy that's got a tag target, it always depends on when you've owned them that it really hurts. For example, last year in round 20, he has this bumper score, 172 in fantasy and dream team, 140 in SuperCoach. The week following, nobody should have been surprised. Whenever you have such a prolific game-changing game, that the next opposition team see that and go, we need to stop what he has done and who he is for us as a team to maximize our opportunity to beat him. So that is the key, is when you see these guys have banner games, know that if you've noticed it as a fantasy coach, elite AFL clubs with opposition analysis coming out the wazoo, they're going to see it too.
And that's the thing, MJ, his 4 highest scores in DT last year were all wins. Now, did Essendon win because he played well? Did he play well because Essendon wins? However you want to slice that. In SuperCoach, 4 of his top 5 scores were in wins. And that is why he draws the tag target so often after those games, is you only have to throw on the tape and watch what he did last week. And you're like, this guy was everywhere. This guy's so creative. This guy's such an important cog in their team. How about we put someone on him to shut him down? Like, it's just too obvious sometimes for opposition teams, especially when he doesn't have a lot of help at times in that midfield, kicking wise. We know, Ridley can be a really nice kick. We know Redmond can be a good kick, but through the midfield, it has been a knock. Parrish, Shield, Caldwell, Hobbs, that's not their game, to be attacking and kickers. It's more to, get the contested footy, keep it moving. So Zach stands out in that regard and draws a lot of heat.
For that reason. I think with him, if you trade into the tagged game, it always hurts more than if you've already received the benefit of that ceiling game. James Sicily at times has been that same sort of guy where they can go on runs, and if you trade into the tagged game, it hurts. For example, after that big score, he goes 55 in DT and fantasy, 72 in Supercoach. So if that's your first time owning Merrett for the year, you feel the pain, as opposed to if you had him the week before, you're still sitting at a fortnightly average of a 110 plus in fantasy and a 105 in Supercoach. So the tag game still hurts, but it's minimized a little bit when you've got the ceiling there. It's interesting that this narrative about the Essendon midfield has also been there for so long too, about where does it fit? How does it fit? So I think your summary is right too, around not just the tag, but that they need him desperately through the midfield for any chance of being competitive, let alone winning.
Yeah, the thing as well, MJ, with those guys that do have the tag target is you almost want to see volatility. And what I mean by that is, if they're volatile up and down, and Sicily probably is more of a guy like that. Whereas for me, Merrett, he's not volatile in that sense. He'll have a couple of tag games, but he's very consistent. I would actually be more interested in starting him if he was more volatile, if he had big swings, because then what I'm banking on as a coach is that he's going to start hot. And then 5 or 6 rounds in, I'm going to force the other coaches,
jump on
at a higher price, having missed those scores. I'm going to test their patience a little bit. Are they able to just keep watching him pile it on? And he's not really like that, though, is he? He's very much metronome for 16 to 17 weeks. There's 2 bad scores,
volatiles,
and there's 3 good scores.
Yep.
Whereas we know there's guys that go bang, 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 and then there's a dip, and then it's all guns blazing. So that's the thing. Sicily, he can be like that. If he gets 16 marks, whoa, he can go 120 for a stretch. Now, Merrett did that last year, which was impressive, but we know a 172 is likely to be the highest score of his career. So
I agree.
For me, when you're very consistent and you have a tag risk, it tells me you're more of an upgrade target. Whereas there's some guys that if they come out and just go nuts, they do put a lot of pressure on other coaches to go, was this the guy that's going to be the number 1 scorer this year?
Yeah.
And this might be the cheapest I get him.
Yeah.
But Merrett doesn't really test you in that regard. It would have to be a stretch, like you mentioned, he had from round 16 to 20 last year, where he's going 133. Now, if he did that for the first 5 weeks of the season, you start him, and now you put a lot of pressure on coaches going, is this guy going to get away from me? Is he going to be so expensive? But we know with that magic number at the start of the year, it would require something so big. And I think for me, you sit back, you see the Essendon mix, you know that he's probably going to be there at a decent price at some point as you're finalising your midfield.
That's true.
And I don't see the burn factor of him being the guy that's the number 1 scorer, and that you really want to have, 60, 70, 80% of coaches want in their team if they're going to make a good charge of the season.
I think that's a really nice point that you've made around him, is to make him a starting squad option. It's you believe the big games are coming, which makes him a captaincy consideration in your starting squad. If you don't believe he is that, then he's your upgrade target. As a reference point, here's the first 6 weeks of what Essendon are dealing with this year.
Oh, sorry, MJ. The one thing I will add in there is Lockie Neal is probably the guy that I'm describing that Merrett's.
Yeah, that's a good
Lockie Neal
parallel.
can be
That's a good
really
parallel.
up and down, and that's where I think it is appealing for a guy like Neal. Is if you believe in Neal, you know that there's probably going to be a stretch of 125 plus. Now you also know on the flip side when you average 107 for a season, there's going to be some stretches where he averages 90. So that's sort of what I mean by Merrett. Is Merrett's that little bit more consistent, a little bit less consistency of big ceiling games. Now, remarkably, they nearly ended up at the same spot, but they did it a very different way, average-wise.
Yeah, they did.
So that's where I mean, if you're going for a starting squad pick and you think they're going to get there at the same way, go for the guy that has the big ceiling.
Yeah,
because at
absolutely.
least I get that approach of if he comes out hot and other people are drawn into it.
I've banked the scores. Yeah.
Spot on, MJ.
Yeah. All right. But before we wrap up the podcast and talk about his draft, Hawthorn, Gold Coast, St Kilda, GWS, Melbourne, and the Pies. So there's a couple of new coaches that come through there as well. So while you might look at that and go, well, based on 2022, I'm pretty smooth sailing for the tag. Well, there's some things we just don't know. And anytime you're like, I'm not sure, and you're spending the amount of financial outlay it is to get Merrett, it's always better to go take what you know and you're confident about rather than, I think this will work out for me when you're spending that top dollar. There's a narrative that you can start him, make him a VC or C option, and he can fly out of the gate and do what he did in that 6-portion week to the back of the year. There's also he's a safe as houses 100 guy and always around the mark of the top 10. That's the thought. Or you're doing as Kane has suggested. You're waiting for that game that completely handbrakes his money making and really send him into a decline. And you're waiting to pick him up at basement price, knowing that he is a really reliable performer, and getting him at the price point of a 95 or 100 as opposed to a 105, 115. Those are season-making games. Let's talk about where he goes on draft day. Kane, I'm fascinated on your take because the volatility hurts a little more in drafts week to week as opposed to an average, but also the durability, the consistency, the reliability. It means it's going to be really there. I think he's one of those guys that, depending on the format you play, probably might determine where you rank him a little bit more than others. So let's talk AFL Fantasy and Dream Team. He's a top 10 mid pretty historically over the past couple of years, which makes him an M1. You placing him in a similar spot in 2023?
Yeah, he's right on the borderline for me, MJ. He's that M1, M2 in a 10-team league. I just think he's right on that threshold. I think there's a couple guys below him that might catch people's eye. Now he's really close. Maybe guys that are averaging less than him. McRae is an obvious name that's been bandied about. Yeah. I know Bailey Smith's been having a little bit of a balance and setback pre-season just with a bit of general soreness, but again, it's also early January. But I think there's some guys below Petrarca, Cripps, Josh Kelly, Bont. You can see a few guys that people might,
there's some names there, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but also Zach Merrett's a name too. And he's a guy for me that I think he's in that, 8, 9, 10, maybe all the way to 13 mid-range.
Yeah.
Super, super safe. I think for me, this is where you sort of got to think past them, just outside of that midfield group. Okay, who else is available in the draft here? Because it's a bit of a blanket. It's a bit of a blanket, to be honest, for me when I'm in that range that Zach's in. So I'm all over. He's probably a third to even fourth rounder, MJ, for me, just because of the value in these other lines. Like, we know Doherty, we know Dunkley. I don't know if I'm super disappointed if I come out of my midfield draft in that selection and I've got Noah Anderson instead of Zach. If that makes, that's where it gets really close to me, because I'm like, well, Noah Anderson, I think I've got him at about a 103, 104. If I've got Zach coming down, the draft value, there's all those type of things. You're like, I just don't think he's that big burn. Now, I think he's just a, hit 2 runs, keep the run rate ticking over. I don't think he's a 4 or a 6. I just think he's that guy. You just keep it ticking over. But history would say, MJ, that he's going to be there. He's going to be there again.
Every
So maybe
year.
someone will
Yeah.
get really, really good value. But I just think when you've got a bit of a blanket in that regard, in the midfield, in that sort of range, it probably really does depend where you're picking at. Like
Where you're
if I'm
picking at
picking,
and how you rank the top line forwards and
Yeah.
defenders probably does it. I think in, fantasy and dream team, while I don't think he'll go in the first round. I think that's too early. The second round, I can see some leagues picking him off there. Third round's probably about right. So it's the early third will be probably his ADP.
Yeah, I guess I'm
in
saying
that
I'm
sort of
really
spot.
happy with him. If I've got pick, a late third, maybe not quite on the turn. That's probably too
Totally.
late, third and fourth. But if I'm if I've got pick 37 and 38,
Yeah.
Because I'm just thinking, well, if I don't get Merrett there, I probably get Bond. That's the
Yeah,
type
that's
of
right.
thing.
You're not too devastated
I'm not
by that.
upset, but I think if you're in the 30 to 38 range, you're not really going wrong. I think if you're much earlier, it might
Well,
just
then
be
you think he's
bit,
a top. You think he's a top 6-8 mid again, which is totally fine to believe.
Which is totally fine, and he definitely could be.
Yeah, in SuperCoach, while he's ranked a top 10 midfielder by average, below him you've got Steele, Andrew Brayshaw, Patrick Cripps, and I'd be really surprised if Merrett's ADP is ahead of those guys. So for me, I've got him as an M2, and he'll probably start flying off draft boards in a comparable spot to what you're talking about, where in that third round, people start looking at him. The fourth round, he'll absolutely start getting picked off. But again, it'll be all dependent
those forwards,
on
though, MJ, isn't it? Because the hard thing
forwards
is we know that the forwards at the top end are quite good, and then it falls away dramatically. So I wouldn't be shocked if that fifth forward, even sixth forward, has gone before him. Like that, just purely on the positional scarcity of that position, because you just keep scrolling down and you see, a Butters at an 86, a Rosie at an 88. We usually tack on 10 points. So if you've got them going 95 in a really shallow forward line, that's pretty comparable to the 105 that I've got Merrett at. So that's the type of thing that comes into your draft, which is always a challenge this time of year.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Hey, mate, as always, an absolute pleasure to have you on this episode. Thank you for your great work, my friend.
No problem, MJ. Pleasure.
If you want to go and read the article on Zach Merrett, is online for you now. The link's coachespanel.tv. That is where you can go and check that out. It's also where you can become a Patreon supporter, where for just a couple of bucks a month, you can get exclusive access to a bunch of different hidden groups, additional articles, podcasts, and even get these podcasts 24 hours early. Well, close enough to some days, maybe 23 hours early. If you want to go and check out any more of the other episodes we've revealed so far, wherever you're streaming this one, you can go back and check it out. So who is number 31 in the 50 most relevant? We often talk about the third year as the third year breakout potential season. This is where guys start to not just show moments and glimpses, but for big chunks of the season become premiums. Tomorrow, we are talking about a third-year player, but I don't think he's going to break out. I don't think he needs to. Who is he? I'll tell you tomorrow in the 50 most relevant.